going to try to cover verse 8 through chapter 6. And thanks for getting me up here early, because I might have to run a little bit, but I think I'll be all right. If I don't, we'll just stop whenever our time is up. The title of the lesson today is Politics and Money. Now, if I'd have given you that title last week, you may not have shown up this week, because politics and money are two difficult subjects when it comes to especially church. But here's the thing. I can do it easier than the pastor of the church can do it, because I'm not after your money. I don't want your money. I don't need your money. If you have extra money, give it to somebody else or give it to God. So I'm kind of exempt from that. And frankly, politics and government is something that is kind of a thing that you have to tread water easily on, particularly today we're such a country divided. But I'm going to stick with what the Bible says. That way I can stay out of trouble, not what people say, because that's how you get into trouble. Now, it's believed that Solomon wrote the Song of Solomon when he was young, and it's a book of romance. It is also believed that he wrote Proverbs in the middle part of his years when he was a very wise man, and it's a book of wisdom. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, it is believed he wrote it during the end of his days, looking back not only in his life, but man's days here on the earth. And he's saying, here are the things I've experimented with. I've experimented with science, wisdom, philosophy, pleasure, materialism, fatalism, egotism, and religion, and that's just so far. There's more experiments to come. And he determined that life without God was emptiness and futile. Now, if you haven't discovered that, you will discover that. If anyone tries to live life without God through their entire life here, they may have ups and downs, but there's going to be this emptiness in their life that only God can fill. So today, politics and money, two of the most volatile subjects, not only of today, but since time began. Years ago, there was three of us that were store managers for Vaughn's Grocery Company. They were all very good friends. And my two other friends and our families were friends as well. And I had this one friend who was not a Christian. Neither one of them were, but they were really good people. They could have made good Christians if they knew the Lord. And wanted to invite us over for dinner, us and our wives, but he said there are two subjects you cannot talk about, and that's politics and religion. Then he added money, and the other guy said, well, what are we going to talk about? He said, we can gossip, I guess, but that's pretty much it. But certainly these are volatile subjects. And in fact, the news media yesterday and the day before was talking about the fact that our families come together on Thanksgiving, and one of the subjects that is going to be difficult this Thanksgiving, as some in the past, is if you start talking about politics. Families have been split over politics in the last few years. I know I'm not going to talk about our family because I don't want you to let you in on any family secrets, but families are divided over politics today. And it's become not only just, well, I don't agree with that or whatever, it's become volatile to the point that big arguments start if you get into that subject. So I don't recommend it. I recommend that you stay with something else. But here is my sword and shield about these things, and we're going to stick to the Bible and what it says, because I believe that's pretty safe ground. Now, we ended last week, as I said, with some very wise words about vows. And the bottom line is, if you make a vow to God or anyone else, you keep it. If you make a vow to God, He knows, and He don't forget. We may forget, but He doesn't. He's going to hold you to it. And if you make a vow to a friend or someone like that, you ought to keep that too, because they're probably not going to forget either. You may forget, but they're not. So let's jump in here verse 8, beginning with chapter 5. And it first starts out with government. It says, if you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice, righteousness in a province, do not marvel at the matter, for high official watches over high official, and higher officials over them. Moreover, the profit of the land is for all, even the king is served from the field. When you think about that a minute, I don't care how much money you got, if there is no food, then there is nothing. So even the king has to be served by the field, whether it's the cattle or it's the crops or anything else. The searcher says, do not be surprised or astonished at injustice. It's going to happen. God has set up higher officials to keep watch over the lower officials, and there are higher officials yet to keep watch over all. Who is that? That is God. There is nothing kept secret from God. He knows everything that happens and everything you do, and He's going to correct these injustices eventually. Everyone that has said anything or done anything is going to have an accounting before God. Now, we want things corrected right away, and that's just the way it is, and I understand that. But eventually, God is going to give account to all the things that are done bad. Even bad government is better than no government, because what happens when you have no government? You have anarchy. And there are countries that have anarchy, and it doesn't go very well. So if you got a bad king or you got a bad dictator or whatever it is, it's better than having none. Now, there are three things we need to do concerning our government, as Paul tells us, and leaders in government in Romans chapter 13, first 7 verses. And I noticed Al did one of them this morning. In other words, be subject to them, the leaders, because they're looking out for our good, and if they're not looking out for our good, God is looking out for our good. So we need to be subject to government and obey the government. Number 2, we need to pay your taxes. It tells us in Romans. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God what is God. Hopefully they'll be lower in the future. They keep talking about it. We'll find out after everything is said and done. There's usually more said than done, so we will see. But the third thing, which I mentioned that Al did this morning, and we're to pray for them. And you might say, but I don't like them. Well, God says pray for even your enemies. And if you think they're an enemy, we're supposed to pray for them anyway. So we should pray for our leaders in government. Now, when you think about being unfair, when you think about oppression and things like that, there is only one place in this life where there's a level playing field. Where is that? At the foot of the cross. Everyone, no matter what he has or doesn't have, it's a level playing field when you come to the cross. There's only one thing that you can bring, and that is yourself. Nothing else. Because nothing else matters. Now, there's a song we all know, don't sing it much anymore, called Rock of Ages. One of the lines in Rock of Ages is, nothing in my hands I bring, simply to the cross I cling, and that's true for both the poor and the rich. Now, we're going to move to dollars and cents. Now, the cents is S-E-N-C-E, not C-E-N-T-S. I think they should get rid of pennies, because I just give them back to they can't buy anything anymore. But that's just my own opinion. I guess somebody needs them. But we're going to move to dollars and cents. Now, in his book on Ecclesiastes, Dr. David Jeremiah, it's 31 Days to Have It is the name of his book, says there are 5 things you should know about money. And he's going to list the 5, and I'm not going to use his comments, but I'm going to use his headlines because I think they're very good. The first one is this: the more we have, the more we want. Let's look at verse 10. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. find the richest person you know, or the poorest person you know, take them to lunch, talk to them, and you will eventually find out that what they want is more. Whether they're rich or poor, what they want is more. All are focused on getting more. Now, there was a survey taken not too long ago, all levels of life, rich and poor, and what the survey asked is, how much more would it take to make you happy? And now, no matter what level it was, all of them came into about the same thing, about 10% more. The rich wanted 10% more because they wanted it to grow. The poor wanted 10% more. They needed to pay their bills. And the middle class wanted 10% more because they wanted a little better standard of life. It all came in just about the same, rich or poor. The question is, what is the motive behind more? Now, for most, it's greed. Remember that movie Wall Street? I think Michael Douglas started that many years ago. He said, greed is good. And that was kind of the theme of the whole movie. That's what drives people, he said, is greed. And he's not too far from being wrong in that movie. And when I thought about that, I looked back and on our life, and I thought, when you go away, I'm gonna save that for just a second. I'm gonna say this. Some, it's good because they have more to give away. And that's a good thing. Again, I look back on my life and I say that when we were young, we didn't have much. In fact, we didn't have anything. And we didn't have anything to give away. We were trying to just get along. I'm sure that many of you have been there. And we got along just fine. And those were pretty good days. But I've told you before, I asked the Lord, don't make me rich, don't make me poor. I'd make a terrible beggar. If I was rich, it'd go to my head. I just want enough to be able to get along and have a little extra to give away. So that's okay. Jesus said in Luke 12:15, he said this, take heed, beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And I found that to be true. Wouldn't it be wonderful just to be content with what you have? Some of you have arrived there. Many of you haven't. But here's what Paul said later on in his life, after he had gone through so many things. A couple of verses that you're very familiar with, Philippians 4:11 and 12. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. That's being content. Takes a long ways to get there, but Paul certainly made it. I know I brag about my mom a lot, but I have to talk about her one more time. She was always, and she didn't have a whole lot, but she was always giving money away. And she was determined before she died, because she was prepared to die about 5 years before she did. And I kept telling her, God's not ready for you yet. Your mansion's not big enough yet. And she would just smile, but she wanted to give her money away. So she decided that she wasn't going to be here much longer, and she was going to give away the rest of her money to her children. And she was trying to give me a check for $530. And she had 7 children at that time, so that was quite a bit of money. I said, Mom, please don't give me this. I don't need it. Give it to my sister. She needs it. Nope. That's your allocation of the money. Whether you need it or not, you're going to get it. So I had to take it to make her happy and write another check to give it to my sister. And I didn't tell her about it, but that was okay. She wanted to give money away. She loved to give. All right, number 2, principle. The more we have, the more we spend. Verse 11. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see with their own eyes? I may have told you this, but this past summer, our company that I founded was set to go public, to an IPO. Now, we've sold the company to financial buyers 4 times before this, and all of our shareholders did very well. We have about 150 shareholders at different levels in the company, but they all did very well. This was going to be the jackpot, the IPO. Guess what everybody did? They went out and started spending money on boats, on houses. One even bought a winery, paid a down payment on it, and guess what happened? Everything fell apart. Remember when Amazon, Jeff Bezos bought Whole Foods? Everybody goes, ooh, he's getting into bricks and mortar. He's getting into the grocery industry. All the retail stocks tanked. All of the manufacturer stocks tanked. These are the people that pay us money. Guess what they did? They cut services, which is what we do. Our business went down. We had to pull the IPO. These people kept coming into my office as shareholders. Well, what am I going to do? I said, what do you mean, what are you going to do? We're not doing an IPO, but I already spent this. Well, I can't tell you, you go out and spend money before you got it, but people tend to do that. You know, you've seen people do that all the time, and they were absolutely down. I mean, they were so far down, I had to lift them up off the floor and tell them it was going to be okay somehow, I hope. Number 3, he says, the more we have, the more we worry. Verse 12. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. There was a woman, the story goes, that was checking into the Broadmoor Hotel many years ago. Now, years ago, they used to have these safes behind the desk where people could put valuables and things like that. And this person was checking in. This woman came down and she was checking her stuff in the safe. So the person checking in asked what she was doing. She says, well, she'll be down about every hour to check on her jewels. She does it all during the day. She's worried about something might be missing, or maybe she wanted to change something. A few years ago, we used to take our children and grandchildren on a vacation per year. They're getting kind of large now to do that. But we used to go to the Broadmoor every other year. We had a convention there. We decided to extend that for another 6 or 7 days and bring our children and our grandchildren up there. It's a beautiful hotel in Colorado Springs if you haven't been there. And we got a couple of suites for their families, and we got a regular room for us, but we didn't need a suite. And when they checked into the hotel, now they have safes in the rooms. Our little granddaughter, Megan, one of Jenny's daughters, she goes in and she sees this safe, and she takes her little plastic jewelry and she puts it in the safe. She's seen the movies, that's what people do. It's probably worth $2. During the 08-09 recession, you remember that, the Great Recession, we had shareholders that had already had 2 or 3 payouts. That when the stock market went down 54%, if you remember, they used to say the 401ks are now 201ks because they're half what they used to be. Well, obviously the investments that these people had were mostly in stocks and bonds, and they crashed. Guess what some of them did? They sold at the bottom. They sold everything at the bottom. And I asked one of our larger shareholders, why did you do that? He said, I couldn't stand it anymore. I worried myself to death. It could go worse. And I said, look, it can only go to 0. That's as far as it can go. And if it goes to 0, you got too much to worry about. Everything is coming down. But many of our people did that. You know, I can honestly say I've never lost a night's sleep worrying about our possessions. You know why? Because all I have and all I own belongs to God. If God needs it, He's going to take it, and that's okay. If He wants to give it back to me, that's okay. Because everything I have belongs to God. It's only on loan to me while I'm here. That's it. John D. Rockefeller, when he was 53 years old, he was the only billionaire in the world. Not the first. He was the only one in the world. We got a few of those now. But a billionaire back then was worth many billions today. He worried so much about his possessions and his money that at the age of 53, he could only eat crackers and milk and bananas.
Really? Wow.
That's what he lived on. His stomach was just torn up.
Oh.
He decided he wanted to start giving money away, and he got into philanthropy. His stomach got better, his health got better. He lived to be 98 years old, and he was pretty healthy till he was in his 90s. You can worry yourself to death. There's no question about it. Number 4, the more we have, the more we can lose. Verse 13 and 14, it says, "There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt, but those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand." The essence of this message is you can't lose what you don't have. The more you have, the more you are at risk of losing. There is no totally safe possession or investment. Whether it's houses or cars or stocks or bonds or gold and silver, I've seen collapses in every one of those things in my lifetime, and you probably have too. There's no such thing. There are safer investments, but there is no such thing as a safe investment. Jesus told us about the only safe investment here in this life. In Matthew chapter 6, I think our sermon series is going to be there pretty quick. This is during the Sermon on the Mount. He says in verse 20 and 21, he says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and neither thieves break in and steal." You heard the term "follow the money"? Well, where your heart is, it's going to follow the money. You put it in heaven, it's going to be there. You put it on earth, it's going to be here. Number 5, the more we have, the more we leave behind. Verse 14. "But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came. And he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in the hand. And this also is a severe evil, just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days so he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger." It's a sad commentary, but true. What is the phrase we hear about riches? When they die, you can't take them with you. It's true. Or you've heard, you ever see a U-Haul behind a hearse? No. Job said, "Naked I came into the world, and naked I will return." You never own anything permanently on this earth, you only rent it for a season. That's true. If you take that attitude, you're going to be fine. Now the flip side of that is much good has been done with sizable gifts to churches and charities. Bill Gates, he was the richest man in the world. I think it's Jeff Bezos today, depending on the stock market where it goes. But Bill Gates decided he was going to set up a foundation to give away his wealth. He got Warren Buffett to come on board with that, and then they went out and got others to sign pledges to do the same thing, and they've done so much good. I see the things they're involved in, and I think, what a wonderful thing. Mark Zuckerberg has agreed to give away, although he didn't sign that pledge, 99% of his money. I kept thinking, what's 1% of $100 billion, which is going to be worth soon? It's probably enough to live on. But if these men who were so rich only knew that you can't buy your way to heaven. They're doing good things, and I commend them for it. But I just wish they knew the only true God, Jesus Christ. Rick Warren, after he sold a bunch of books, became a very rich man. What did he do? He committed to God he was going to give away 90% and live on 10%. You know who did that way before he did? J.C. Penney. Remember J.C. Penney? Well, the stores are kind of going down today, but they used to be the store to go to. They were the Nordstroms of 40, 50 years ago. He committed, by the way, his first store, you know what it was called? The Golden Rule Store. He was a Christian from youth. And he determined after he started making money, he would give away 90%, tithe 90%, and live on the rest. One way to find heaven on earth is to make investments in it from earth. And that bank is accessed through what we set our hearts on. You can access it today. Now, we've gone through those 5 things. Here are 2 things you need to know about God concerning money. Number 1, our ability to earn money is a gift from God. Look at verse 18. It says, "Here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor, in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him. For it is his heritage." You know, it's the American tradition to be the self-made man or the self-made woman. You hear these stories, books are filled with them about millionaires and even billionaires that invented something, sold something, or worked their way to the top. And people call, wow, what a great self-made person that is. By the way, Scripture promotes hard work. And industrious people, Proverbs 6 through 21 and 2 Thessalonians 3:10, it promotes hard work. But you know something? There is no such thing as a self-made man or woman. Let me tell you why. Every person who ever made a dime did so with a heart, mind, soul, strength, talents, and opportunities supplied by God. People say to me, well, you're a self-made man. No, I'm a God-made man, hopefully, because He has supplied all that. When I was a young store manager at Vaughn's, I thought I was reached the top of the world. I was a pinnacle. I was a store manager. And God had other plans. He said, I'm not through with you yet. He said, I want you to do more. And I said, well, what more? What more can I achieve? And then when I started teaching God's Word to this little group of young people, when Tony and I, after she was saved, in fact, we had a junior high class, I thought, I can't teach these young kids. And actually, it turned out pretty good. And then God had me teach high schoolers, and then young marrieds, and then here we are today. And I said, how can I teach these people who know much more about the Bible than I do, who are much more educated than I do? And God says, just go do it. You know, that's how you find out what your gift is. You go do it. And if it works, that's your gift. If it doesn't work, it's not your gift. It's pretty simple. People might have classes for weeks over what is my gift. I learned a long time ago, just go do it. But as a young man I learned that what God gives, he can also take away. You know who wrote that? That was Job. In verse 21 of the first chapter, he had lost everything. This is a book of, 40 some odd chapters. Before you get out of the first chapter, he had lost it all. And he was one of the richest men to live in his day. A whirlwind came along and took it all, including his children. And he said, naked I came into this world, and naked I will return. Solomon says you have worked for what you have, so go ahead and enjoy it. But remember where it came from. It is a gift from God. Let me ask you a question. Why do you give birthday presents to your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, however far down you want to go? Why do you do that? Because it makes them smile. God does the same thing with us. He gives us gifts, and he wants to give us gifts because it makes us smile. And you say, well, I wanted that certain thing and he didn't give it to me. You know why he didn't give it to you? He knew it wasn't good for you. It may make you smile at the time, but that's the same reason that God gives us gifts. Now, the second thing it says about God here is our ability to enjoy money is a gift from God. This comes back over and over again, whatever it's talking about. It is a gift from God. And let's look at verses 19 and 20. And this is the key verses in these two chapters today. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is a gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. God not only gives us the gift, but the ability to enjoy it. You can have a lot of things and not enjoy them. God, that's another gift from God. Whether it's food to eat, whether it's homes to live in, whether it's the earth to explore, whether it's art to look at, are all given to us by God to enjoy. But before you get your heart too set on things down here, remember what James said in chapter 4, verse 4. And let me get to that. He said this, do you not know that friendship with the world is to be at enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of God, friend of the world, makes himself an enemy of God. And that is when you strictly set your heart on things of the world. He also said, your life is like a vapor that appears for a while, then vanishes away. Okay, in chapter 6, how are we getting along? We're doing just fine. The searcher tells us our view of life may be so distorted that we may not be able to see that hard times may be the best years of our life. Remember when? I think that's the name of the song, if I remember correctly. Remember when? When you look back over your life, and we have certainly done that, I can tell you that some of the best days of our life is when we had nothing. We lived in a little apartment after Tony and I got married, 247 Hewlett, apartment 4. I can remember a long ways back. It was this little apartment, and then Tony got pregnant and Jenny came along, and there was no children in that apartment house, so we were going to have to move. Guess what? The landlord looked the other way. And I think Jenny was, I don't know, a couple years old before we, how old?
We had to move before she could walk.
Oh, okay. But we didn't have to move right away. I think we hid her in the closet. My wife always keeps me straight. But the point is, we had nothing. We were just getting along from meal to meal. And I look back on some of those days as some of the best days of our life. They're wonderful times. But hard times can be some of the best days. The searcher, Solomon, says that prosperity may not be always good. By the way, in chapter 7, which we'll be into next week, he says adversity may not always be bad. Sometimes adversity is better than prosperity. And there are 4 statements about prosperity that show us material wealth may not always be good. Chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires. Yet God does not give him power to eat of it. But a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and it is an evil affliction. The message here is simple. You can have all the money and all the possessions in the world, but not the power to enjoy them. That's pretty important. Many suffer from this. People we know, I'm sure it's people you know. They have cars, they have homes, they have fancy clubs, and they go to fancy restaurants, yet they are empty inside. All you got to do is look in their faces. You know, before we had any money, we used to go to Las Vegas. There's 2 reasons you go to Las Vegas. One is some people just get high on gambling, and then they get low after they gamble. And the other is they really think they're going to make money, so they go. Guess who makes money there? Not very many. And if they do, it's only short term. You stay there long enough, you're going to give it back. The key is God does not give them power to enjoy it. And I can tell you, people that make money the wrong way, God does not give them power to enjoy it. They may look like they're enjoying it, but they don't. That lesson is repeated in this book over and over. Enjoyment doesn't not come from increased possessions at all. It is a gift which God has given. But why would God withhold the ability to have something, enjoyment, when he has given the ability to have it? Well, the answer is all the way back in chapter 2. We saw it, I think, in the first or second lesson here, in verses 25 and 26 of chapter 2. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. We're going to see in a minute what that means. To a man who is good in his sight. How do you please God? There's only one way to please God. And Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 tells us, without faith it is impossible to please God. Faith is the thing that pleases God more than anything. And I can tell you how you can tell a man or a woman of faith. How much do they pray? A person does not pray without having faith consistently. You have to have faith in order to pray. Okay, verses 3 through 6. It says, if a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial. The 2 things important to the Jewish family was a big family, lots of sons, and a good burial. Very, very important. I say that a stillborn child is better than he, for it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and its name is covered with darkness. Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, we're talking about the stillborn child, this has more rest than that man. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice, 2,000 years, but has not seen goodness, do not all go to one place? Now remember, this is under the sun, so where does the body go?
Right.
It goes, whether saved or lost, the body goes to the grave. So that's the one place it's referring to here. Okay. Do you know in Scripture who had the most children listed? Well, you'd think Solomon, since he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, he was not. He had only 80. 80 children. You know who, now let me go back to say this. It is believed that Adam and Eve had the most children, but they're not listed. Remember it says when he was 130 years old, they had Seth. And then he lived another 800 years and had sons and daughters. They're not listed, so we don't know how many. But remember, they were the only two. They had to populate the earth. They could have thousands, I don't know. But anyway, the one that's listed was Solomon's son, Rehoboam. He was not a good son, by the way. In fact, the people tried to throw him out because he taxed them so heavily. He said, "Do you think Solomon taxed you a lot? Wait till I get there." And he taxed them very heavily. But he had 88 children, 18 wives and 60 concubines, 28 sons and 60 daughters. But this says, back in verse 3, if a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that his days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. Who was the oldest man that ever lived? Everybody knows that. I'm going to tell a story here, as we're getting towards the end, about a family, to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here, that lives not too far from here. They did quite well in this life and worldly possessions, and they had a lot of money. And they both loved the Lord. They both went to church, and they had a daughter, and she was raised up in the house of the Lord, and she loved Jesus, and she went on to have a couple of children. But what they wanted was a son. And they finally had a son. And he was the apple of their eye. And so this son was given everything he wanted. Not everything he needed, but everything he wanted. And what happened when he got up to his early teens? He went off the deep end. He got into drugs, he got into alcohol, and women, even at that very early age. And they prayed and prayed and prayed for this son, but he just kept going deeper and further away. And finally, this lady went to the pastor of her church. She thought the pastor was great and maybe could help them. And she told him the story, and he looked her in the face and said, "You have spoiled him rotten. That's what's wrong with him. You've given him everything he wanted, but not everything he needed. You withheld nothing from him. So you kind of get what you deserve in that kind of situation." They ended up having to send him away back east somewhere into some Christian school that's almost like a jail, because a lot of these kids tend to run away. And by the way, he ran away a couple of times. Now this story has a happy ending because he finally got married and married a wonderful Christian young lady. And they are now happily married, but there were 20 years of hell because they spoiled that person. Spare the rod, spoil the child doesn't just mean not whipping them. It means don't give them everything they want because they don't know what they should have. Okay, let's go on in verses 7 through 12. We'll quickly finish this up. It says, all the labor of man is for his mouth, yet his soul is not satisfied. For what more has the wise man than the fool? What does the poor man have who knows how to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Whatever one is, he has already named already. For it is known that he is man, and he cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. Since there are many things that increase vanity, how is man better? For who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life, which he possesses like a shadow? Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? I'm going to let James be the commentary on this. In James chapter 4, beginning with verse 13, James says this: Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little while, then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. We should not contend with God. Then I'll end with a quote from C.S. Lewis. He said this: To argue with God is to argue with the very power that makes it possible to argue at all. That's pretty good. Have a wonderful and blessed Thanksgiving to each of you, and hopefully we'll see you next time.